Alrighty fellas, listen up. Guitar Hero is dead, and Japan has had a monopoly on rhythm games for far too long. How are we going to capture the American audience? We could partner with major labels to include popular music. Yes, then we could do yearly releases. I like that. Controller-based, so customers don't need to buy expensive peripherals. Yeah, but that means less money, so no's. Hey, janitor, any ideas? How about we had guns, a thick demon protagonist, and some really, really heavy metal? Now, I think before I gush about how much this is a contender for one of my top few games of all time, I should preface this by saying that Metal Hellsinger was not a game I was expecting to enjoy. It was one that I was flat out unwilling to, which might confuse some of you, but all you really need to understand is that once I hit play, I was fully prepared to and somewhat hoping to just uninstall the game after 20 minutes and let it rot in my Steam library until the sun explodes. This in part came from the reality check that this is a rhythm game, a genre which I despise and never really have liked, ever since an unfortunate but likely very amusing accident while playing DDR in public when I was like 9. I tell you this because I want to really emphasize just how hard I stacked the deck against this game going in, so I can really hit home just how much Metal Hellsinger surprised me, despite my personal preconceptions of it, and ended up being one of the most unique and memorable games I have ever played. Now, getting right into it. Metal Hellsinger is a rhythm shooter, which despite seeming super niche is actually not the only one of its kind. BPM, bullets per minute, came before it. Now, I personally didn't like BPM, but I've gotta give it some respect as it likely laid the groundwork for Hellsinger. But for those of you who might not get what's happening, a rhythm game is suing a certain action to the beat of the music, sometimes buttons, sometimes dancing, and so on. A rhythm shooter is doing that, but with violence and gunpowder. And don't worry, it's actually not nearly as hard as you might think. If you're like me and that seems a little bit out of your comfort zone, then there is an accessibility option that keeps all of your shots on beat, which, yeah, I enabled it. I already know I don't like rhythm games, so having the option to only marginally interact with the rhythm portion of my rhythm shooter made my experience much easier to enjoy. In Hellsinger, you play as the Unknown, a demon whose voice has been stolen from her by Satan. You're also going to be joined by Paz, a skull with a southern drawl that will be the main narrator throughout the game, as well as being a sidearm that shoots fireballs, which, while not the highest in damage, will keep your combo going even if you're not actually hitting anything. Which is actually quite important, because this combo meter up here, by the way, is the most important part of the entire game. It multiplies your score as you run through, but more importantly, it's how the music is scored on the spot. Simply put, the better you're doing, the more damage you will be dealing, and the better the music will get. As each layer you go up will have more instruments added, and with vocals at the end when you have a max combo. Even if you don't care about the points like I assume most people do, you'll still want this maxed out constantly because the music in this game is honestly on a whole other level. If the title didn't give it away, Metal Hellsinger has metal in it, which is an immediate boon to it, as heavy metal just so happens to be my favorite flavor of sound waves, right next to MMO ambient noises and whatever this Pac-Man song counts as. And let me stop you right there before you question how weird my tastes are. Let me outright confirm that, because I drink unflavored sparkling water for the taste, so don't worry, I'm very aware that my preferences are cause for a second satanic panic. Even if heavy metal isn't your thing though, you've gotta give them some credit, as they somehow got some of the legends of metal to come together for the soundtrack. The noticeably different vocalists for each song does make every single one of them stand out, and all of it comes together to make a metal soundtrack that is definitely something that I would love to listen outside of video games. The setting and the gameplay are only bolstered by the soundtrack, which makes the inclusion of non-metal songs in the DLC make no sense at all. One feature that I really liked is how the songs were not bound to the levels that they were originally on, as you can play any level with any song, including the tempo that comes along with it, which is great because I was blading through the entire game with one of the fastest songs, which really sped up the moment-to-moment shooting, as well as letting me listen to Disillusion on loop. It adds a great deal of replayability to the game, even if not directly, which is kind of important considering the fact that this game is level-based and can be beaten in like under 3 hours. In fact, my only real complaint about the moment-to-moment gameplay is that it's not something that I can marathon, as I find myself needing to take breaks in between the levels to either relax or play something else entirely. But I don't think that this is a problem with Hellsinger specifically though, as both BPM and Hi-Fi Rush, which are also rhythm games, also tired me out mentally pretty quickly, which is odd to me because I know for sure that I am pressing objectively more buttons when I'm playing World of Warcraft, which I can binge all day. But even with the necessary breaks, I did find myself consistently coming back to play more. For an arena shooter, the levels themselves are exactly what you would expect, mostly linear design with larger arenas, which you will be fighting the enemies in. The short length of the game does allow enemies to be consistently added throughout the runtime, which stops things from ever feeling particularly stale or stagnating, which unfortunately is not something I can say for the bosses, which all look too similar and all follow the same format. You walk in, you deal some damage, the boss has one unique attack, then disappears, and then they send a horde at you. And while I do find it a bit repetitive, I do still think they're fun, but could have definitely benefited from not looking copy and pasted with some minor adjustments. At the very least, the final boss is different in every way, which is nice, but the rest of the game could have used some of that as well. But once you beat the Red Judge, it's actually not all the game has to offer. Not only can you replay the levels with different songs, as I've said before, there are also these little smaller challenges called Torments, which you can do to get small equipable buffs. And once you beat the game, you unlock the Archdemon difficulty, which makes everything harder by letting endgame elite variants of enemies appear earlier and shuffles the enemies around, which I actually like, and most of my playtime was spent on this. And that's not even all of it. Recently, there was a free DLC game mode called Leviathan which came out, which is a roguelike, which has you getting more powerful as waves of enemies get progressively more challenging. It's actually quite fun and has its own separate progression system attached to it if you like, so you can sink a lot of time into it. Something tells me that this mode was added to not only address the complaint about the game being pretty short, but also because its main competitor, BPM, is a roguelike, and already has that element of replayability on its side. Overall, I love Metal Hellsinger, even though half of its genre is one that I don't really like. Even so, I find myself coming back to rock out and slay demons very often. The ending teases a sequel in heaven, which I will definitely be here for when it happens. With all that, thank you all so much for watching. I'm trying to rewire my brain to allow me to make shorter videos more often, so I can make them faster without losing my mind. But what did you think? Have you played Metal Hellsinger? And if you have, let me know in the comments what you thought, because it is a very niche concept. But if you liked what you saw, go ahead and like the video, it does help a lot, and subscribe to see more. Ooh, speaking of subscribe, look at how close I am to 1,000 subscribers. Great. Now I have to figure out what I'm supposed to do for that milestone. It has to be something good.